Now recording from the world headquarters of College Viability, recently relocated to Colorado Springs, Colorado. It is This Week in College Viability News and Commentary for April 27th, 2026. Hi, everybody. Gary Stocker, still sitting in front of the Blue Yeti microphone and the smooth running Riverside.fm podcast. I just have mountains out the back door window now. Didn't have that in St. Louis. And I'm going to start off this week's podcast with a warning, not about college closures or college spin or apps. My warning to you is if you ever decide to move 3 states or more away, don't do it. While the logistics to the move to Colorado Springs were smooth, the work involved was and is monstrous. And my wife did almost all of the work. So be advised, should you care to have that decision cross your plate anytime soon. Back to business. This week's news and commentary include a lot of cutbacks and closures. This has got to be the beginning of a new trend here. We have a second college closure announcement in Massachusetts. More cuts for majors and programs. The list gets longer each week. And there are a few better signs, other than majors being cut, programs being cut, of an industry in contraction than this is. Students at a closed college from last December, Martin University, sued the leadership. It's interesting why they're suing. I'll talk about that. And sports programs at the big brand name colleges, the Power Four, if you will, continue to be sliced away, and of course, much more. This, as always, is the podcast that talks about the financial health and even viability of public and private colleges with data and with details and with perspectives offered, I believe, nowhere else. And as I always tease, don't be a podcast hog. Forward this podcast link to your higher education colleagues, your friends, your family, your neighbors, those families considering college for this year and coming years. The perspective offers them a chance to look at colleges from a different viewpoint and maybe change the trajectory of their decisions across lots of ways. Layoffs and cutbacks and closures. Anna Maria College in Massachusetts announces abrupt closure, citing financial and enrollment woes. This came from April 23rd. Massachusetts Live had the story. Juliet Schulman Hall had the story. And I had a story about this college, about Anna Maria College, just a few weeks ago. So let's start this off with a quote from the president at Anna Maria College. This conclusion, to close, was not reached quickly or easily. Anna Maria College President Sean J. Ryan, who started in July of last year, 2025, and Board of Trustees Chair David P. Traynor said in a statement, "For months, the Board of Trustees, our leadership team, and the Sisters of St. Anne walked a distressing road together, examining every option and hoping at each turn that something might change." First of all, what was Sean J. Ryan thinking when he took this gig about 9 months ago? Did he look at the finances? Did he look at the enrollment trends or anything? Or did he just want the gig? Maybe, Mr. Ryan, Dr. Ryan, I don't know which. Maybe he just wanted to become a college turnaround guru. Nothing wrong with that. Didn't work out here. Second, here is a pull quote from the board chair, Mr. Traynor. He says, hoping at each turn, this is from above, hoping at each turn that something might change. Geesh. At what point did they realize this strategy of hope was unrealistic? And in that time frame, how many students chose Anna Maria College as their college or invested more time and money into that college that was on the verge of closure? But nobody was warning about it. Now the media had news stories. The creditor has sent them a hate letter, and many other colleges. And, but how many, I guess, how many college students and families read news stories about higher education, even their own college? And this story is sad. Every college closure is sad. And the saddest part is about what's yet to come. This type of story will happen again and again. I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it. It'll happen again and again until we reach the tipping point that I have talked about so many times. When that happens, when the market in general realizes that smaller private colleges, or the private colleges in general, or the colleges in general, are financially challenged, when that happens, I believe students will choose brand name publics and maybe brand name privates, the big ones, and will shy away from all others. And anecdotally, I think I've talked about this before, I think that's already happening. And so when I've talked about closed college stories before, here's another headline. After that announcement, Samantha Cheney at CBS Boston had this story on April 25th. Accepted and enrolled students say they were blindsided by Anna Maria College closing in Paxton, Massachusetts. All right. So the New England Commission of Higher Education, the accrediting agency, said in March of last year, 2025, that Anna Maria was in danger. The agency questioned, and this is from Ms. Cheney's story, the agency questioned whether the steps it was taking to increase enrollment and reduce expenses would be sufficient for its viability. And so going back to that quote, the decision to close reflects years of financial pressure that we were ultimately unable to overcome, and the honest recognition that continuing would not be responsible to the students, faculty, staff who depend on us. This is from the president and the board chair. They said in an announcement, we tried to find a way. We are grateful to everyone who tried alongside us. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Now, I know, caveat emptor, Latin phrase for buyer beware. And one can certainly make the argument that the students at Anna Maria and Hampshire College and other places should have done the research on the college they chose. They should have. You and I do research on cars and computers and houses and anything else that we do. The same should be for colleges. But has there ever been a cultural recognition that colleges close? A generalized cultural recognition in this country that colleges actually close? How many students and families have ever heard of a college closing? It's a tough road, I understand. Students and their families have some responsibility to look at these colleges and say, hey, I don't like their finances. And that's what we do here at College Viability. We're making the tools available so that anybody can easily compare the financial health of these colleges. I went back to look at the tool we have in development. We'll be out shortly for both Anna Maria and Hampshire. And it showed for a long period of time, they were struggling. And we're developing this tool so that anybody can understand it and make comparisons. So it's time. It's time for the market to change. There are too many colleges. I've said this too many times. There are too many colleges and not enough students willing to pay even ridiculously discounted tuition. And I guess as you listen to this podcast, think about the people in your world. Think about those folks in your world that should get a heads up that colleges can and do close. And they do so with much, 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 too much regularity. Onward we go. Iowa Regents approved 10 program cuts at 2 universities. This was April 23rd. Ben Unglesby had the story at Higher Education Dive. Elimination of 10 programs at 2 of the state's public universities. The board previously mandated that each of the state's 3 public universities, that's all I have in Iowa, for 4 years, review low enrollment degrees. Now, low enrollment degrees is different from what I track. I track low completion majors. That's the app that we have, the College Majors Completion app. If you're a student worried about your college not offering journalism or having a strong or weak journalism program, you want to look at majors, not enrollment, and I've got the tool for you. Go to collegeviability.com and click on the products link, and you'll see the app listed there. And it was interesting. There was a regent, again, this is from Ben Unglesby's story. Regent Christine Hensley asked that the Iowa state leaders look at the actual financial, or fiscal is the word she used, the actual fiscal impact of closing their programs, as well as if any employee positions would be cut. Hensley later followed up saying that universities that the universities would not save much on costs by closing these programs. Financial analysis of programs she went on and courses were often contested and unstraightforward. I'm not sure that's the word. Not straightforward. Can often show the surprising benefits of keeping low enrollment programs. Sure love to see a citation on that because I've not seen that before, and I watch this stuff all the time. If you've got the citation, send it to me. And financial analysis of programs. Really? What other major industry does not know the net revenue from each of its product or service lines? Insurance? They separate profits and costs from car insurance and auto insurance and life insurance and homeowners insurance. Manufacturing for the bazillions of products that are out there. Defense, finance. They all track net revenue. Colleges, by product, by service line. Very, very, very few colleges do that. And it sounds like the folks in Iowa do not, but I'm not positive on that. So as we've talked about before, some states are mandating program closures based solely on headcounts. Ohio and Indiana are two examples that have done that, establishing minimum levels. Indiana public colleges cut or merged about 60 programs, and Ohio is somewhere around 90. And here's the second story from Iowa. Brooklyn Dracy had this story on April 22nd from the Iowa Capitol Dispatch. All right, more cutbacks. That's only news to those in Iowa. Here's what's caught my attention. Here's what caught my attention from Miss Dracy's story. The University of Northern Iowa requested approval to expand its cybersecurity and system bachelor's degree program with an online option. They go on to say, with no additional resources necessary to launch the pathway and plans to support it with tuition revenue going back into the program. The online modality, it continues, will maintain the same curriculum, same standards, and learning outcomes as the on-campus program. Great. So, how silly is this? Who's going to create the online program? Do they have to be paid to do that? Are they going to allocate costs to the online version? And if so, the person who does this online conversion, they sure as hell require additional resources. And does the University of Northern Iowa or any of the Iowa publics have the systems and processes in place to account for tuition allocation for a given course? Because each student sitting in that class, like each person flying on an airplane, pay different amounts. And so as I read this, it reads kind of like an amateur hour justification. I'll leave it at that. And this was approved, by the way. This was approved by the Iowa governing body. We continue with the theme of cutbacks. Michigan State and the University of Michigan face over 60% cuts under a state funding bill. This was, again, Ben Unglesby at Higher Education Dive on April 23rd. Now, this is a proposal. As the story reads, Democrats and higher education folks are against it, to be expected. Republicans tend to be in favor of these proposed cuts. But the big picture, and again, I'll have the link in the show notes for the whole story. The financial pressures on colleges continue. That's the big picture. Whether these cuts come to 60% or some other number, the pressure is still there. And you can almost certainly expect tuition and fees to increase in the coming years in Michigan and other places as colleges look to gain revenue lost for their publicly funded institutions. Martin University closed in December of last year. They called it a pause initially. A couple of weeks later, they said we're closed. So here's a story from Josh Moody at Inside Higher Ed on April 27th. Former students allege Martin University stranded them educationally after closing abruptly without a teach-out plan, leaving some with no degree to show for completed programs. Again, I'll have the link in the show notes. And this isn't a we didn't know lawsuit. We've seen those from other colleges when they closed. This isn't a we don't know, we didn't know. This is a you abandoned me. My words, not theirs. This is a you abandoned me lawsuit. From Josh's story, plaintiffs argue that the sudden closure resulted in diminished educational outcomes, diminished status of educational credentials, financial loss, loss of opportunity for advanced degrees, loss of employment opportunities, and loss of the benefit of financial investments. They also allege Martin University failed to provide promised educational training and services. And again, in this day and age, we will continue to see colleges close. And those that don't, many, will cut back on degrees and programs. It is in the student's interest, I pounded on the table there, it is in the student's interest to look at a college's financial health and to see if the majors they offer have more than a handful of students, because those are the ones who are at risk of being cut back or canceled. And of course, we have all the types of apps you need available at collegeviability.com and mycollegeviability.com as well. Page 2, let's get away from cutbacks and layoffs, but there's still negative stories. Temple University, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, has lost an average of $200 million annually as enrollment slides and retention rates are a major issue. Internal report says Susan Snyder at the Philadelphia Inquirer had this story on April 20th. And this is a well-done story by Ms. Snyder. There's a lot to unpack. And again, the link will be in the show notes for those who want to read the whole thing. And it's yet another story about low completion numbers for majors. A Temple Commission study from Ms. Snyder's story by the National Association of Colleges and University Business Officers, I think that's NACUBO, found that the vast majority of undergraduate students at Temple University who get degrees are concentrated in 20% of Temple's 197 programs. So 20% of about 200 is 40, a little bit more than that, for those of you who didn't pay attention in math class. 41 is the exact numbers. 41 programs enroll more than 75% of students who get degrees, the NACUBO study found. Meanwhile, the other 120 programs serve about 10%. 34, this has got me, 34 programs had no students graduating. 34 programs had no students graduating. They're still in the books. And those programs are still in the books. And there were similar disparities at Temple among master's and doctoral programs. On and on and on the story goes. And let's go to sports. Let's leave Pennsylvania and go to Arkansas. The Associated Press had a story on April 24th that Arkansas, the University of Arkansas, to drop men's and women's tennis for financial reasons. Arkansas is dropping its men's and women's tennis programs following this 2026 season for financial reasons. Here's the quote from the university. The landscape of college athletics continues to evolve, requiring us to make challenging choices as we balance competitive opportunities, resources, and the long-term sustainability of our department, Arkansas Athletic Director Hunter Yurchek said in a statement. He went on to say, ultimately, we concluded that we are unable to provide the level of support necessary for our tennis programs to consistently compete in the SEC and nationally at the standard our student athletes, coaches, alumni, and supporters deserve. And they did say the current students will be able to finish out with their scholarships, which is fine and fair, and glad to see that. So it's an example, but here's what we watch for. I would bet sooner rather than later, we watch for more announcements like this, as many are predicting. We watch for more announcements like this as colleges test the public reaction to cuts in athletics programs. I wouldn't doubt for a second that next week I have on the podcast a story about protests at the University of Arkansas for cutting the tennis program. Or somebody will step forward and offer a fee, an endowment to support tennis. My bet is that there will be colleges who announce cuts, wait for the public reaction, and then backtrack when public reaction is intensely negative, which is happens once, it's going to happen every time. Hampshire College. I had this closure story, I think, before the long drive out to Colorado Springs. Students devastated as Hampshire College becomes latest small school to close. We let off the podcast with a story like this. Matt Pritchard had the story at NBC 10 in Boston on April 21st. And here's a quote from a student named Lucina. It's like no comment from me. It's like the best place I've ever been. said student named Lucina. This was a school where people really cared about each other, said another student who wanted to remain anonymous. And the liberal arts school, which emphasizes independent study, this is Hampshire College, announced its closure, citing falling enrollment and financial strains that has been in the news for years. Lucina goes on to say, I'm devastated that we weren't able to get more support and funding. Schools like this are dying, Lucina continues. Now, no. And then there's absolutely no doubt that despite the fact that this college has been on a college closures watch list for years, that the college meant a great deal to each of these students. I don't quote their stories outside of their grammar to be negative. I quote them to establish a pattern. And here's a pattern. We've seen this with other colleges that have closed. Almost every college student has a positive experience at the college they attend. I know I did. I can't think of anybody who didn't. I'm sure there are some who didn't have a positive experience at whatever college they attend. Many even have life-altering changes. That a college closes only means it ran out of money to keep the lights on and meet payroll. And every college closure story that I've done and read about from others, every college closure story has responses from deservedly crushed students. It's a normal reaction, and it's going to continue. However, folks like myself, Matt Hendricks, and very few others track and report on the financial health of these private colleges. I've talked about that many times already today. Hampshire, Anna Maria, plus colleges that I know about in Illinois and Missouri and Pennsylvania and North Carolina and other states are not going to survive. Well, if you're listening to the podcast and you start talking to your computer screen or phone screen right now and say, Gary, tell us which ones. Which ones are going to close, Gary? Give us the scoop. I'm not going to. And it's not my public decision to make. If you want to set up a Zoom meeting with me or a phone call, maybe we can have a different conversation. But that's why I created the apps. Students and faculty and staff and communities, higher education professionals can look at these easy-to-use comparison apps for the data, to look at the data and make their own decisions. Plus, from a business and personal perspective, I really don't care for the risk of litigation that will follow if I publicly identify individual colleges that will close. I am making the case, as you well know, that this is an industry, say that fast, an industry in decline. I'm providing the data. I'm providing the comparisons at ridiculously low prices so that others can make their own decisions. It's not my role. It's not my place to say this university is not going to survive. I will certainly challenge them. I will certainly point out the spin they're using. I'll certainly point out their bad data. On occasion, I might say, I have, this college is not consideration worthy. This is probably as far as I'm going to go. How about some more sports? How about flag football teams? Flag football teams are a new pitch for small colleges to lure students. Amanda Albright had the story at Bloomberg on April 23rd. I don't know about this one. There is an abundance of data that shows minor sports don't generate materially significant new net revenue. My experience and expertise suggests that most colleges don't account for either the direct or indirect costs of these sports. As I've talked about before, they just look at the revenue from tuition. Are these college leaders who start these new sports delusional? I don't know, probably not. Are they engaging in management by public relations? Absolutely. They're putting this press release out saying, look what we are doing. On the other hand, as I've used before, TWICV shared in Fiddler on the Roof, the musical, sports is a monstrous part of our American culture. Look at something else like pickleball. It has exploded in the last 5 to 10 years? So to add sports has value. I don't know that it's financially significant. Maybe adding flag football is culturally noteworthy, probably is. It is not financially noteworthy by any stretch of the imagination. And then, boy, Susan Snyder's got on a roll today. She's got another story. Drexel's new president must tackle a deficit and declining enrollment. He sees it as a moment of reinvention. Where have we heard that before? Again, Susan Snyder, Philadelphia Inquirer on April 16th. And I'll tell you what this story is. And nothing against Susan Snyder. She does really good stuff. But this is another example of the ubiquitous college leadership change stories that we see all the time. A new college leader as president or provost or the vice president of admission praises their new college's history, and ruminates on the fabulous possibilities of its future. And there's nothing here. In almost all cases, there's nothing there. This is a declining industry. I haven't done this yet this week. Let's go to the data. Here's what the new college president, Antonio Merlo, is walking into at Drexel. In 2024 and 2025, $100 million losses from operations. That means Drexel spent $100 million more in expenses than they took in revenue. Interestingly, the total operating revenue increased. By a lot. Revenue was up by a lot. You know what I'm saying next. But total operating expenses were up even a lot more. Their endowment at Drexel is $1 billion plus. They're drawing that down a little more than is normal. So not a big deal though. So here's what's going to happen. This is based on other stories of new leaders coming in. Here's what's going to happen at Drexel. Dr. Merlo will start cutting expenses. Eventually, the inevitable no confidence vote will follow. Dr. Merlo will seek his next career opportunity, and no materially significant reductions in expenses will occur. Will Drexel close? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They have a runway that takes many, many, many fingers and toes to count. But it is a prototypical example of a higher education college, and the higher education industry that cannot control its expenses. Period. Jeez. I'm moving on. How about a political story? Cleveland.com from a podcast called Today in Ohio. This was published on April 21st. The college crisis that Ohio leaders and governor candidates are too scared to solve. Here's a quote from the hosts, Leila Atassi and Chris Quinn. Ohio's college system is in free fall. Enrollment is falling, costs are exploding, and the politicians who could do something about it are too busy protecting their own hometown campuses to confront the crisis. Host Leila, I hope I got that right, Leila, I think it is, Atassi laid out how Ohio's higher education system faces a reckoning that goes well beyond politics. She's been listening to my stuff, I think. Ohio really does have too many campuses chasing too few students. I've said that before, right? And enrollment is dropping, costs are rising, and there's a real strain on the system. The state deliberately built this sprawling network of colleges decades ago, back when a campus within commuting distance of every Ohio resident seemed like, and probably was, a worthy goal. And when the internet was, as co-host Chris Quinn put it, not even a glimmer of someone's imagination, remote learning didn't exist. This is when all these Ohio colleges started up. And they go on to say the world has changed and the system hasn't. Atassi said politicians might like the idea of consolidation in the abstract, but they become defensive the moment anyone suggests closing schools in their districts, not in my backyard. And the interesting model here, co-host Chris Quinn, wondered why no one is suggesting the BRAC model. BRAC, if you recall, back, 20 plus years ago, it was used to close down unneeded or excessive military bases. In that system, experts were assembled and could be assembled for colleges to objectively list colleges, this is military bases back in the day, objectively list colleges ripe for closure, and then get the state politicians to vote up or down on the entire list. And it gives each of them cover. This happened for Congress for the BRAC model many years ago. So the wrap. I'm running long today, and I suspected that would happen when I didn't do the podcast last week. So here's my wrap. what started off with me and very few others warning of this college closer trend way back in 2021, 2022, has now become the standard line for almost every higher education talking head, including me. The financial, the enrollment, the outcome data is there. Don't ignore it. If your livelihood depends on a college, on your college, check its financials. If your community depends on your college, on a college, check its financials. If your education and career preparation depends on a college, on your college, check its financials. And finally, if your child depends on a college, check its financials. Do it at mycollegeviability.com. And if you want, go to collegeviability.com as well for more background. And as always, glad to be in Colorado, glad to be operating from the New World headquarters, which is an extra bedroom in our new home. Thanks for listening. Make sure to share the podcast link with your higher education colleagues and especially with students and their families. The May 1st decision deadline for this year is Friday, although it's a softer and softer date each year. And let's make sure we give students and families a heads up on checking out their college's financial health and even their viability. So with the Rocky Mountains looking down on me, I will be back next Monday with another podcast show of This Week in College Viability at College Viability. I'm Gary Stalker. So long for now.